Morning. I'm glad that you could join us again. Last week, I had to stay home and be quarantined for the next 2 weeks because I was exposed to COVID. And I have now had a test, and I've had a few minor symptoms. We're still waiting for test results. And so I was a little off my game last week, and I did not begin with a prayer like I normally do, but I want to do that today. So if you'll pray with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we acknowledge how powerful and mighty that you are, dear Lord. We give all of our worries and our cares to you. We lay them at your feet, dear Lord, and we acknowledge that you are in charge of all situations. We are so thankful that we have this time that we can spend together to open your word and learn more about you, learn more about Jesus. Please help us to open our hearts and minds to you and to apply these things to our lives. Be with us today as we study from your word and guide us in the way that we should think and guide us in our actions, dear Lord. We're so thankful for all the things that you have given to all of us. And we are mindful that there are some out that are suffering right now, suffering from sickness. We pray, dear Lord, that you would heal them if it be your will. We also pray for our upcoming election. Please be with both candidates as they are striving to do their best, dear Lord. Be with us as voters that we go out and cast our ballot, dear Lord. And then we lay that election at your feet also, knowing that you are really the one that is in charge of all situations. We are very thankful to live in the country that we live, dear Lord, and help us always not to take advantage of that, but to realize the freedoms that we hold so dear to us. We ask all of these things in your precious Son's name. Amen. Okay, so last week we were in chapter 18, and we were talking about the qualities that a Christian should have in their life. It seemed like the entire chapter was Jesus talking about the qualities, especially in relationships, that a Christian should have. We talked about he brought a child in, and he mentioned humility. And what's interesting is he said that humility was the one virtue, in fact, the only virtue that he emphasized as being necessary in the greatness of his kingdom. So I like that. A child's humility is the pattern for a Christian and for our fellow man. We also talked about the responsibility that a Christian has. Whether we like that or not, other people are watching our words and our deeds and what we do, and we cause someone else to stumble, a weaker brother or sister in some way. We draw them into sin somehow. Jesus says it would be better if we drowned. He thinks it's that critical that we watch our actions, that we watch our words. And so that was an interesting quality that a Christian needs to have too. We talked about self-control, and that a Christian has to sacrifice. They will sacrifice things in their life that would hold them back from obedience to God. And we mentioned an athlete, how an athlete sacrifices things to become a better athlete, to compete at the level that they compete in. And perhaps that's not such a bad analogy for a Christian, is that we are going to have to make sacrifices in order to compete, compete and be the kind of person that Jesus would like for us to be. We also talked about one of my favorite stories, the lost sheep, and how God will go out and seek to find that one lost sheep, how important we are individually to him. And that is also how we need to treat our fellow man, that they are that important that we would go out and seek just the one that is lost. So that is also a good quality for a Christian to have. Then we got into church discipline. That there is a person that, we used an archery term, that misses the mark, and they need to be brought back gently. So out of love and concern for that person, we go to them and we try to bring them back. We do it privately first, so as not to have to help control rumor and gossip. And then if need be, we bring witnesses with us. And then if need be, we bring it to the whole church. But we're obligated as a Christian to guide and correct when it is necessary. And it must be given in love. So there was just several things that we talked about, that qualities of a Christian that a Christian should have in their lives. The one we have not talked about is the very last one in chapter 18 in verse 21. And we have to talk about this. Needs to be a quality of a Christian also. And so we're going to start reading in Matthew 18 verse 21. And I will just read to the end of the chapter. Jesus answered, I tell you not. Oh, I'm in the wrong, 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Okay, so Peter comes to Jesus thinking he's going to be extremely generous when he offers to forgive somebody 7 times. Now, according to rabbinic law, the rabbis had told the people to forgive 3 times. So where did they get this? Where in the law did they get this fancy number that you can forgive somebody 3 times and that's the extent of it? Well, it's actually found in the book of Amos. And if you want to go over there and take a look at it, Amos 1 kind of lays it all out. This is where they get this. Amos, of course, is a prophet that was called by God. And you can tell in Amos 1 the subtitle, Judgment on Israel's Neighbors. Okay. So this is something he is being commanded by God to tell. And so if you look in verse 3, it says, this is what the Lord says, for 3 sins of Damascus, even for 4, I will not turn back my wrath. Well, if you keep going, it's also in verse 6. For 3 sins of Gaza, even for 4, I will not turn back my wrath. Verse 9, for 3 sins of Tyre, even for 4, I will not turn back my wrath. Okay, over and over and over again, 3, 3, 3. So apparently, God's going to forgive 3 times. Well, Peter is going to up the ante. I think I'm going to take this fancy number 3 and I'm going to double it, and then I'm going to throw in one more extra one just for good measure, and I'm going to go to Jesus and say, Jesus, I'm going to forgive somebody 7 times, all right? And it was not for a mere man to be more generous than God himself. So the limit had always been 3. Peter pads his number. I guess, I don't know what he was thinking. I never know what Peter is thinking. So anyway, but what does Jesus say to Peter? Oh, no. 70 times 7, or my Bible says 77 times. Well, in other words, there is no limit to our forgiveness. No limit at all. And he backs it up with a parable. And you really need to put this parable into perspective. And for the life of me, I wrote this a couple of months ago. I was working on this a couple of months ago. I don't know where I got this information. I thought, did I get it out of Lonnie's commentary? I went to Lonnie's commentary. No, I didn't get it there. Did I get it from William Barclay? No, I didn't get it. I have not been able to find where I got this information, but this is what I got. The first servant owed his master 10,000 talents. A talent was the equivalent of 313 American dollars. Now, whenever this information was written, it was probably true. How long ago that was, I don't know. William Barclay wrote in the 1950s, so you can imagine. Maybe this amount has changed over time. But anyway, the talent was the equivalent of 313 American dollars. So do your math. 10,000 talents, 3,113,000. Okay, that's a lot. That is a lot. In fact, that is an incredible debt. This amount is more than what I will even make in one lifetime. That is a lot of money. It was this that the servant was forgiven. Okay, so the debt that the fellow servant owed was a minuscule amount in comparison, 100 denarii, and American dollars, $6.50. These are huge comparisons. Jesus is using a huge comparison. Barclay did say this. Barclay quoted A.R.S. Kennedy when he said, the 100 denarii could be carried in one pocket. The 10,000 talent debt would take an army of 8,600 carriers, each carrying a sack that weighed 60 pounds each. If these guys formed one line at about a yard distance apart, the line was stretched for 5 miles long. And if they had to wear a mask and be 5 feet, it would be a lot longer than that, okay? That is a huge difference, all right? Jesus is trying to make a point with this parable. The contrast between the debts is staggering, staggering. If God has forgiven us the debt that we owe to him, we must forgive our fellow man the debts they owe to us. We're the one that owes God 10,000 talents. We owe him. We owe him. There's absolutely no way we can repay him for that. Nothing that we have to forgive can even faintly or remotely compare with what we have been forgiven. It points out that our debt to God is one we can never repay. Really. Note something about the unforgiving servant. He did not admit his inability to be able to repay the debt. In fact, he said, I'll pay it off. I'll pay it. His response shows his heart. He didn't really appreciate even his own forgiveness, or he didn't appreciate the gift that he had received. I feel like I'm the unforgiving servant. We're all the unforgiving servant. We should forgive our brothers. A man must forgive in order to be forgiven. Jesus is making it very, very clear. There's no gray about that at all. So really, that concludes the qualities that a Christian should have toward his fellow man in this chapter. It's amazing that they're all in there together. And forgiveness is the last one that Jesus says is vitally important for a Christian. So that brings us to chapter 19. And I am going to start reading in verse 1, and I'm going to read the whole section on divorce. So let's read Matthew 19, verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Some Pharisees came to him to test him, and they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let man not separate. Why then, they ask, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman, commits adultery. The disciples said to him, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it is better not to marry. And Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For some are eunuchs because they were born that way. Others were made that way by men, and others have renounced marriage because of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept this. Okay. So my version, of course, has the Pharisees approaching Jesus with this question. And it also says that they approach him in order to test him. Okay. This is a tricky subject. Jesus has already spoken on this subject back in Matthew 5. So here is a second time that Jesus is going to talk about divorce in the book of Matthew. And it is such a controversial subject. And that is the reason why the Pharisees chose that, perhaps to entrap Jesus or cause him some difficulty. That is why they chose this subject. And just so you know, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law and the scribes were divided on this issue. They were not unified on this at all. So in the book of Matthew, we have talked about this subject twice since we have started our study of Matthew. The first time was when Joseph was going to divorce Mary secretly. And Jewish custom was that there was an engagement, and sometimes that engagement occurred even when they were children. It was arranged when they were children. And then the next step was the betrothal, and this happened about a year before the actual marriage. But when they were betrothed, it became a binding agreement, all right, between them. And from that moment, the betrothal, this couple was known as husband and wife, even though they were not living together. They were known to be husband and wife. The betrothal could only be terminated by the divorce. Therefore, you see the predicament that Joseph is in. He's not married to Mary yet. He has not taken her as his wife yet. But the betrothal is in place when he finds out that she is pregnant. And so the only alternative that he could come up with was that he was going to have to divorce her, but he was planning to do it quietly. Of course, we know God is going to intervene on that matter. So the second time that we have talked about divorce was in Matthew 5. And I want to just read it again because we need to know how Jesus sits on this. So Matthew 5 verse 31 said, if it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay, Jesus is saying there is only one reason that you could divorce, and that was because of marital unfaithfulness. Jesus made it a problem which both a man and a woman are responsible, and it's not just the woman's problem. Jesus actually quoted the Deuteronomy 24:1 passage, which was part of the Old Testament divorce regulations. Why is that important? Because guess who's going to bring that up here in just a few minutes? The Pharisees are. So the scenario described in this passage is that if the wife who does not find favor from her husband because of something objectionable about her, he could divorce her by giving her a certificate of divorce. So I just want to read that to you too. So I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 24, and I'm going to read verse 1. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing, objectionable, displeasing to him, because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. I'm going to stop right there. Okay, I'm just going to stop right there. That whole entire chapter is about divorce. That is the scripture that the Pharisees have taken and run with, okay? The rabbis of Jesus' time discussed intensely about what was considered objectionable, okay? For example, the husband might decide that she is a terrible cook. All she wants to do is go out to eat all the time, and she just doesn't know how to do anything, okay? So that's a reason for a certificate of divorce. I'm going to write you a certificate of divorce. Or maybe by the time they finally get to be husband and wife, after um, they had been engaged since they were children, he decides, you know what, she's just not as pretty as I thought she was. So we're getting rid of her. I'm going to write her a certificate of divorce. Whatever the reason, maybe she talks too much. Maybe she talks all the time, and he just can't stand it. So, but they talked a lot about what was objectionable. What does that mean? And when can a man give the woman the certificate of divorce? Okay, but Jesus says, no, I'm going to make it really clear for you. There's only one reason that God would allow for a divorce, and that was marital unfaithfulness. Jesus declared that if God does not accept the divorce as valid, then remarriage was adulterous. I'm going to stop right here, okay? Because I am not going to be judge and jury over what God will accept in a divorce. But he makes it clear that if she remarries or he remarries, unless for marital unfaithfulness, then it is adultery. So I think that people that are divorced today, that is something between them and God, and I will let God make that decision. So anyway, Jesus has said, accept the divorce as valid. If he accepts it as valid, it's fine. But if he does not, and they remarry, then it is adulterous. But you get a glimpse into how easy divorcing your wife was and what ridiculous things could be used as reasons for the divorce, okay? So they had taken Moses' teaching, which they often did, and they broadly interpreted the reasons that a man could divorce. So there is a double standard when it comes to a woman, all right? Here, she was considered property and she had very few rights. And it was extremely rare for a woman to give a man a certificate of divorce, but not unheard of. Mark's account, Mark 10, verse 42, 10, verse 12. Jesus speaks about a woman who divorces her husband, remarries, and she is the one that is committing adultery. So you think, why would Mark be any different? You have to remember that Matthew was written for the Jews, a Jew writing to Jews. Mark's gospel account is written to Gentiles. It's written to Gentiles. And so it is the only gospel account that talks about a woman divorcing her husband, because Mark was written to Gentiles and they were under Gentile law, and a woman was permitted to divorce her husband under Gentile law. Okay, so that clears that up. So the question that the Pharisees now kind of set the whole scene, come to Jesus and ask him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Okay, this is a really loaded question. It's a trick. Because if he says no, he's basically saying, Moses, who was given the law by God, we're just not gonna, and they're gonna be like, I mean, that's cause for major fireworks, okay? So he doesn't say that. Instead, he chooses to say, you have heard it said. Well, we've heard that before too. Whenever Jesus begins to say, you have heard it said, you know something bigger is coming, okay? Because constantly, Jesus expected us to live at a higher level than the law. This is what the law says. You've heard this. This is what I say. A higher level that was interpreted than what was interpreted by the law. We know what God thinks about this matter because of what Jesus said. But one of the great problems of Jewish divorce lies within that Mosaic statement. And how is that phrase, some indecency found in her, interpreted? And they were divided on this. So Jesus goes all the way back to the very beginning, Adam and Eve, back to creation. In the beginning, God created Adam and Eve, man and woman. And Adam and Eve were created for each other and for no one else. Their union was complete and unbreakable. Verse 5 says that the man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife. Some versions will use the word cleave. I like that word, cleave, because in the Greek, that word cleave means to join fast together, to glue or cement together. God's design was that a man and woman have a permanent arrangement that is only dissolved by death of one or the other. I really like that. So Jesus, going back to the beginning, says, here is your pattern. Here is a symbol for every one of us to follow. Jesus' argument is that God has joined this man and woman together. It's not a law. It is not only law. It is the principle. In God's eyes, they are one, and man cannot separate that. So, Jesus' answer to their question was saying that it was never God's intention for a husband to put away his wife. Rather, they were to work side by side, even glued together, as if they were one. Jesus didn't take sides on this, and he averted the Pharisees' intention of entrapping him. But the Pharisees are not finished. They see a point of attack in this. So they're going to bring up the scripture that we just read and found in Deuteronomy 24, verse 5. Well, of course they would. They think they have Jesus up against the wall, basically. Because if Jesus denies this scripture, they can say, aren't you saying that Moses was wrong? Are you seeking to be above the divine law which was given to Moses by God himself? Are you setting yourself above Moses as a lawgiver? Oh, so Jesus has got to answer. His answer is that what Moses said was not, in fact, a law, but it was an exception. Moses was not commanding divorce. At best, he was only permitting it in order to regulate a situation. The hardness of heart that Jesus referred to had to do with an attitude toward marriage that had developed sometime between Eden and Sinai. They were divorcing for any and every reason, and Moses is like, okay, until you get used to this new idea, I'm gonna make an exception for you. And this is what Lonnie said. I'm going to quote him. Since God's original design and decree about marriage, which was found in Genesis 2:24, sin had entered the picture, Genesis 3, and had corrupted God's original design. As time passed, it had become a settled practice for men to divorce their wives for any reason. God had made a temporary concession that was to last only until the coming of Christ and the institution of a new covenant. So God's original design, one man for one woman for a lifetime, is still his desire. Then Jesus states again the original statement from Matthew 5 that there is only one reason for divorce, and it was marital unfaithfulness. And so he states it again. You know, if the scripture says something once, we should listen. But if it's repeated again, okay, that doesn't happen very often in scripture. Bam, a second time. It's really important. It's really important. So Jesus, he gets through saying all of this, and I think the most important thing to remember here is that Jesus has set down a principle that the idea of marriage is a union which should not be broken. The Jewish term for marriage, by the way, is kedushin. It means sanctification or consecration. Marriage is not given for one act in life, but for all acts in life. The basis of marriage is togetherness. And marriage is not complicated. It's just a love that thinks more of the happiness of others than it thinks of its own. It is proud to serve, able to understand, able to forgive. It is very Christ-like. And it forgets self, and when you forget self, then you find happiness. Jesus is a master at responses. He really is. He doesn't leave any room for rebuttal on this. Divorce was never a part of God's plan, and they really couldn't find fault with anything that he said. So the Pharisees don't have any more to say about this, but his own disciples are like, what? You know, they got their own questions about. The question raised by the disciples shows they're thinking about the whole matter. Remember, they're Jews. They've had this thinking their whole life too. It was just like any other Jew. The statement by Jesus was shocking to them. It would then make more sense for them to remain celibate than to be caught up in an unhappy marriage. And they say this to Jesus, especially if the only way to get out of the marriage was through adultery of the spouse. So Jesus simply says that marriage, even though it requires much devotion from a man and woman, it is still best for the majority of people. Only in cases of eunuchs would this apply. They are able to receive this saying because they are eunuchs. And I think you all know what a eunuch is. So a eunuch was the only one that needed to refrain from marriage. He still says marriage is the way to go. It is best for most people. But he wants it to be the union that is glued together and lasts for a lifetime for those individuals. So moving on, I think Jesus has said all he can say about that, and they could find no reason to question him any further. So that was good. I want to cover this little part about children before we close, the little children in Jesus. So I'm going to start reading Matthew 19, verse 13. Then little children were brought to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked those who brought them. And Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. Okay, so parents bringing infants, small children to Jesus to be blessed. This is an old custom. And I thought, okay, is there anywhere in the Bible where children were brought to be blessed? Not children as we, not toddlers and stuff, but there were examples in the Bible of children coming to be blessed. One was Genesis 48, when Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph brought them to Jacob to be blessed. Another example was when Jacob himself stole his brother's birthright from Esau. Isaac would touch Jacob or Esau in this process, and we know how Jacob disguised himself. But in this particular passage, the parents wanted Jesus to touch, pray for, bless their children. And no wonder they wanted Jesus to lay his hands upon them. They could see what his hands could do. I mean, these are the hands of Jesus. And Jesus was happy to do this. However, the disciples thought this was a waste of valuable time and energy. Why are we spending time? Jesus must have had a really packed schedule, okay? And it's going to get that way at the end too. A packed schedule. And the disciples are like, we don't have time for this mess. And you would think, they're being really tough. But I think it's more of an example of misplaced love. They were doing it out of love for Jesus. We know it's possible to misplace our love. They were protecting him. It was all about protecting him. Jesus had many demands upon his time, and this one they saw as a nuisance. But Jesus didn't agree. He wants these children to be allowed access to him. And to deny access to Jesus was to refuse those who were like children in spirit. In our last lesson, we talked about having the mind of a child, and here's another example of Jesus saying, you let these little children or people that have the spirit of a child come to me. You will have access to me. That kind of humility, that kind of spirit, the spirit of child, they have access to me. Jesus then placed his hands on these children, and then he gets ready to leave the area. He's going to do exactly what these parents want. I wanted to get that little bit of section out of the way. I'm not going to start the next. Again, we have been going for almost 35 minutes, and so I'm going to be finished for the evening. And next week, I'm to be back in person again. So I'm super excited about that, and we will begin in chapter 19 with the rich young ruler. Thank you for joining me here today. I covet your prayers right now. We're trying to keep my in-laws that live with me well, and my husband, I need to keep him well too. And so we're hoping we're going to get through this with nobody having COVID in this house, and that would be remarkable, seeing that we had a guest that had COVID that was with us for 4 days. So I would covet your prayers at this time. Have a great day, ladies, and I will see you in person next week.